Another third period collapse for the Panthers as now their season is starting to slip away. Can they get it back in now what's a stretch of Atlantic Division games before the Olympic break?
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, February 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the nation's #1 sports podcasting network, and it is your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel, and if you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. You can do that all on FanDuel. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers. We are going to discuss the Panthers' 2-1 loss against the Winnipeg Jets on Saturday late afternoon. We are also going to discuss the Panthers' playoff odds and really what they have left in a season that has really felt like a big valley, and the fact that the bill has really truly gone due in more ways than just one. And then we are going to preview tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Buffalo Sabres. So, yeah, it's a third consecutive loss for the Florida Panthers as they lose 2-1 against the Winnipeg Jets at home. And it's the start of a short 3-game homestand for the Panthers. And really, when you look at this game, the Panthers had a lot of energy coming out of the first period where, although it was Winnipeg who got the first 3 shots on goal, the Panthers really started to really take control. Although they did eliminate one of their penalties by a penalty themselves, the Panthers were really starting to buzz after that. And I mean, the Panthers really did have an opportunity to take a 2-goal lead in that period multiple times, as they got 7 power play shots of 7 shots on the power play of their 13 there. And even when they scored that goal to make it 1-0, which was right deflected off of Etulusarinen and parked right in front of Eric Comrie and into the net, the Panthers just continued to buzz from there, which the Panthers had a lot of speed. They were very connected. They had a lot of support from their forwards to their D when it came to their puck battle. So their exits were actually very clean there. And for the Panthers there, that was very encouraging. And then really for the Panthers there, they couldn't continue that on throughout the second and third period, which I mean, the key to the Winnipeg Jets and to defeating them is eliminating stars like Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor, and even promising guys like Cole Perfetti, which is crazy to think that of the 5 goals that Cole Perfetti has on the season, 2 of his 5 are against the Florida Panthers, and one of them to at least get the Jets into the shootout, the first matchup, and then this one to tie the game there for the Jets in the third period. But it really came down to the fact that the Panthers just couldn't find an insurance goal. And this was kind of a theme of 2 different games that I saw in one from what we've experienced this season, which the first one I'll refer to is the game against Nashville back in early December. The Panthers had a 1-0 lead, a whole bunch of power play opportunities, and they just couldn't convert to get that extra goal for them and for the Panthers there. That allowed the opposition to come back there and then the Panthers in that game specifically, they lost 2-1 in overtime and only come out with 1 point out of it. And these are starting to catch up for the Panthers. You look at all the teams that they faced when it comes to teams who are at the bottom of the standings that the Panthers have lost multiple times to: Toronto, Nashville, Winnipeg at least once, Calgary once, even though they're going to see them again. It's starting to catch up for the Panthers here. And that's just the very discouraging part whenever you see these games on paper and you think that the Panthers should beat them. But, you know, with the Panthers and them not having all the injuries and guys playing up certain positions and adding on to the minutes there, they're not as strong as they were. I know that's very simplistic of me to say, but it really goes to show how not at full strength they truly actually are here. And it's just You see the same logo, but it's really truly not the same personnel overall when it comes to that. And really for the Jets here, they really took away the middle of the ice a lot of the time, where the Panthers were coming up with speed, but it wasn't speed coming up the middle. It was more speed coming up the wings. But then when the Panthers would try to cut inside, those chances were being broken up multiple times. I mean, I thought the best player on the ice right before the Jets scored those 2 goals in the third period was Josh Morrissey. There was one opportunity where Matthew Tkachuk fed to Carter Verhaeghe, and then Josh Morrissey was there to take away the opportunity where Carter Verhaeghe had an open net, and there was that opportunity for the Panthers at that point. That was to make it. That could have made it 2-1 after Cole Perfetti tied the game. That was the chance to really take control, get your confidence going, and then shut things down in the neutral zone, which the Panthers, at least for the most part, were starting to break things up in the neutral zone. And then the Panthers gaining the red line and still getting those crisp line changes there. But the Panthers, just one mistake can really cost you, where you see Bennett and Tkachuk come up the ice, where the Jets were coming up the ice, and then you see a little bit of a indecision. Is like, do I go out for a change? Do I not? And then a perfectly executed give and go from Scheifele. And then once he releases the puck, he's going to the net and then off puck, and then he's able to get that score there. So that's just the frustrating part about that whole sequence there for the Panthers. But also on the first goal, I mean, when you're pinching in the neutral zone and it's your forward Sam Bennett going back, and your guys aren't fast enough to get back to defend the blue paint, that's going to create a higher danger chance opportunity for them. And Jeff Petrie just wasn't able to do that. And then Tobias Bjornfoot, even though he came to support, that left the middle of the ice open for the Winnipeg Jets. And to think that the penalty kill was still in a really great place, as they're still in top 10, but you got to find a way to put the puck in the back of the net. And this was one of those performances by Sergei Bobrovsky, which, the criticism towards Bob has been deserved at times, where he's given up a lot of goals against. But this was one where you suppress a good amount of opportunities and you go even 7 minutes in between shots. But both of those shots were goals in the back of the net, where at this point, a lot of the times what they give up is more of the quality versus quantity for the Panthers. And at that point, you sometimes wonder if I sometimes wonder if I could even look at Corsi anymore for the Panthers, as far as the shot attempt share for the Panthers, which is in their favor, and the fact that they're still giving up a lot of goals, even if they are suppressing shots. But then it's just one of those little itty bitty breakdowns that constantly happens for them, which it really starts in the middle of the ice in that neutral zone area, which that's what happened with both goals, the line change and the line change in one, and then the failed pinch in the other. I did mention the first game for that it reminded me of was Nashville. The second game that I wanted to mention that it reminded me of was the game recently against St. Louis. I know the Panthers had to come back there in order to even make it a tie game going into the third period. But I mean, you had an opportunity to still take control of the game, and the fact that it's consecutive games where it's tied, and then giving up one to at least which the first one was with at least 10 minutes left there. I know the second one, I know the one for St. Louis, the one that they got the go-ahead goal was in the final 10 seconds of the game, but still it's another one of those goals that go in the back of your net that you're just giving a big exhale, and it's just like, man, this again, it just continued to be that theme. And the thing is, with these last 3 games for the Panthers, it's been 1-goal losses, which the Panthers have been great in these 1-goal games all season. I know sometimes that whenever you see 1-goal games and the Panthers pull the extra attacker, that it can result in an empty net situation on the other end. So that can skew and the 1-goal game stat a little bit. But still, whenever things are tight for the Panthers here, and when you have that much of a sample size there, you kind of see that the formula for the Panthers is still there. You just don't have necessarily the bodies there to put it all together for this group this year. And going back to Bobrovsky, two great saves that he made. One of them, the first one on Perfetti, where it trickles by him, and then Gustav Forsling is there to sweep it out of the net. And then when it was still 1-0 Panthers, Kyle Connor coming up the middle, and then the net was slightly open, and then he just flashes the leather there right before a TV timeout. So there was times where Bob looked back to his playoff / Vezina form there, and it just unfortunately was not enough. And one thing that I do want to refer back to is one thing that they said in the second intermission. This was the drive to the finish, where they bring it back to Goldie and Randy right before the third period starts. And what did they say in the drive to the finish there? Stop the Stars. And that's what unfortunately they did not do there, which you think that right before that goal, you're about to go 120 plus minutes without allowing a single goal from that group of Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor, which you can only contain so much of them, but it just happened to be right before the final 4 minutes. And it doesn't help that the Panthers took another penalty while trailing, so that ended any opportunity for them to get any kind of comeback there. So it's a constant shooting themselves in the foot, and then inability to close the gaps, and then that results in a penalty for the Panthers there. And right now, the season's slipping away, and the Panthers have a major hill to climb. So we are going to actually transition to segment number 2, where we're just going to discuss the state of the Panthers here, and just discuss how much the bill is due, and is it really worth it for the Panthers to go on another long playoff run when we know that the core group of this is signed for a really long time? We'll discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. And there's nothing like being in an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the movement, getting tickets through, that part is always, hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast. Without the hassle, it puts the advantage back to where it belongs, the fans. I pulled up the Game Time app, picked an upcoming NBA game, and had tickets locked in within minutes. Love seeing the all-in prices up front, no surprise fees at checkout, and being able to see the views from my seat before buying made the decision easy. Zone deal stood out. You could choose the section. Game Time picks the seats, and you can save. Great last minute options too, with the NBA tickets showing up at solid prices, and everything feels quick, intuitive, and stress-free from start to finish. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. Segment number 2 here on this Monday, February 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day on the nation's #1 sports podcasting network. And if you haven't already, go check out our Everyday Club. It's an access to an ad-free audio feed for the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. It's an invite to the members-only Locked On Everyday Club Discord server, which includes group chats just for the listeners of the show, and tap the link in the show notes to learn more. So this is a conversation that when you look at where the Panthers are, and that this team is currently on a 3-game losing streak, and not only a losing streak for them, but all of their games coming in regulation, which has really swung their playoff odds from 56% last week when they were on their 3-game winning streak, and they were flying high when it came to how they finished off that Midwestern road trip out in Winnipeg, Minnesota, and Chicago, 56% at the time, and then how much it swung just in that stretch alone with these 3 losses, which now puts the Panthers at 32%, according to Money Puck. And this was always going to be a season where you felt that the bill was going to come due for the Panthers, with not as much of a rising cap. More of the core players for the Panthers are coming in to having their contracts due for this team. And I want to, first of all, express my gratitude to the Florida Panthers and just the uh, how much hockey has grown here in this region. And really, it showed yesterday as well during the Stadium Series, which fit over 64,000 people at Raymond James Stadium. We saw a goalie fight, and the weather cooperated to the point where it was so cold that the NHL had to heat the ice so that it wasn't too cold, so that it didn't crack there. And we're talking about this in Florida. So congratulations to the NHL and the state of for putting on two great events in Florida, and for the state of Florida and the hockey fans here for fitting almost 101,000 there. But again, going back to the Panthers here, and I just want to first of all express my gratitude for the Panthers here on just 3 amazing years of long playoff runs and just creating so many memories for fans, and the fact that so many, and even if the Panthers are ever to go into rebuild mode, that there's going to be a section of fans who will not pay attention to Panthers, obviously, but there's also going to be a section of fans who will become fans for life, and that they have interest in the sport of hockey, and that they're going to register their kids in the sport as well, because they want to play. They want to be just like the stars that they grew up watching. I mean, I became a diehard baseball fan because of the Marlins 2003 World Series run, and I still watch them today, even though they are a travesty of an organization there. But that's besides the point. So that's gonna even happen. That's gonna even have a section of fans here in South Florida for this run that they've been through the last few years. But with the new rules with the cap and what you could put in with a possible playoff roster, and what the Panthers could do as far as buying guys, which you can't get Barkov's full cap hit to at least bring in an Artemi Panarin unless you put him on season-ending IR. Which now there's more momentum on him bringing Panarin here, which again I don't know if I agree with, but if you make that move, that is more for upcoming seasons more than it is this season. But that's kind of where I want to go and that's even if the Panthers don't, and this is a discussion that I want to have even if the Panthers don't trade for him, because I've heard a lot of conversation about, oh, you can't tank this season because that first round pick that they gave to Chicago in the Seth Jones trade, that's unprotected. And I understand that. But when you win 2 Stanley Cups and you trade, I don't give a crap where that pick lands ultimately, because those 2 Stanley Cups and that specific pick that ended up being a top 4 defenseman, which the Panthers were going to be already strapped as far as the cap with their goalie room, that was going to prevent them from building the rest of the roster this year and even beyond. And of course, you got to give him a raise, give Spencer Knight a raise, while also figuring out what you do with Sergei Bobrovsky, and that wasn't going to fit the present for the Panthers there. So it's still the right move for Bill Zito, because it resulted in a second banner at Amerant Bank Arena. And the thing is with this group is, and thankfully, I guess it's a blessing in disguise that with the injury to Barkov, it allows guys like Evan Rodriguez and Jesper Boquist to still stay here in South Florida, which that's the great thing for the Panthers and how they're navigating, because with the rise in cap, which is expected to rise another $9 million, you can still fit everybody back in if this team were fully healthy. And the thing for the Panthers here, anyone, at least in my opinion, anyone who was on that championship team last year, even the year before, if they're an expiring deal this coming offseason, I don't even think that the Panthers should sell those guys. If you had any connection with those, you owe them anything to keep them on this roster, because of what they built and the brotherhood that they and the long playoff runs and memories and celebrations that they put together. You don't sell a guys like Adrian Greer. You don't sell a guy other guys there, and that's just one example. But if Bill Zito wants to sell a guy like Luke Cunnin or Jeff Petrie at the deadline, whatever, I'm not gonna be angry about that. But I've said this multiple times. In your 23-man roster, if a healthy Barkov, Kulikov, Nosek, Jones are right back, you have to find a way to clear $7 million of your cap, and that's going to result in purging the roster big time. And even if you don't, and you bring them to the playoffs, and you put your game day roster together, you're going to be having to scratch guys left and right here. Which I did one calculation, and there's one possibility that the only major scratch you're going to put is Evan Rodriguez and Jesper Boquist. You can still find a way to fit Mackey in there for playoffs, but they're not going to be also at full strength. And I don't think they're going to win the cup without Alexander Barkov. And again, you got to ask yourself, how effective is Alexander Barkov going to be if he's able to suit up for playoff games? Because that's at the highest level, the highest speed. And for him to not even get a preseason and you're putting him in playoff games, I question whether it's worth it for additional mileage, which I kind of compare it to a car, which my car is over 200,000 miles. And I'm trying to limit the amount of long trips that I do. So sometimes trips from Miami to Orlando, I'll decide to take public transportation instead, and I'll pay it just to ease the mileage on my car. So you could actually compare a little bit to this team right now for what they're going through. And even the guys who are suiting up, like Sam Reinhart, yeah, he's playing in games. He hasn't missed a single game this season, but he's not out there for every skate, for practices, and for every morning skate. He's taking the option, which he's going through something. Nico Mikla was in danger of losing time this season just a week ago. And he's still playing and fighting through something. And it makes me wonder if less of that mileage is worth 4 more years, which this core is locked up mostly until 2030. 27 season, 28, 29, 30. 4 full seasons. It may look a situation where it's like a short-term pain for long-term gain. And these last 2 losses for the Panthers have really helped me shift that. And listen, I'm not going to tell anyone how to fan. And you know what? If the Panthers make the playoffs, I'm not going to be angry about that neither. It's extra playoff games. It's extra content for me. It's extra trips in the press box for playoff games and extra coverage. Awesome. But you're thinking about a chance to at least get right. And it's hard to look at bigger picture when you want to win so badly now, and that how spoiled we've been when it's come to winning. And there's 32 teams. Only one can win every single year. And we've been very fortunate to see the Panthers be at the top. The Panthers be that team that everybody can't stand and wants to be taken down. It's going to be a celebration for hockey fans that it's the Florida Panthers that aren't going to have that chance, because they know, you know why? I'm going to say it in the words of Syndrome from The Incredibles, because I'm a threat. The fans know that the Panthers are a threat if they get in. So that's the thing. So, and another player who's going through an injury, Brad Marchand, he's day-to-day. And he possibly re-aggravated an injury from that caused them to miss 7 games. But the good news is most of the top 9 is signed. 6 defensemen are signed. You still got to figure out what you're doing in goaltender, in the goaltending situation. And with the rise in cap, there's an opportunity for the Panthers to make a big trade still in the offseason to bring in someone. And your biggest trade piece right now is Mackie Simiskevich, which he's still a developing piece. And that could be a trade asset to you, because you're not going to get guys in free agency as far as the big fish. It's going to require a trade if they want to at least get another piece back in for this group. And it may not and Mackey is a promising prospect, but he could be used as a chip to bring someone more proven, a sure thing as well, for this Panthers team in order to extend the window and solidify it a little more. So that's the great thing, is that this in no way shuts the door for the Panthers window. And that's kind of where I want to at least make you guys think. Of course, I'm not going to tell you guys how to fan, but I want to make you guys think a little bit for where the Panthers are at here, because the bill is due. And this is that year where it's the valley instead of the peak. And every championship team goes through that. We saw it with Colorado, Vegas, Tampa Bay with 2 first-round exits. And right now it looks like this is that year for the Florida Panthers. So hopefully they do. I won't be mad if they make a run and they eventually do make it in, but it may be worth it in the long term if they don't, at least in my opinion. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to preview tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Buffalo Sabres. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And it's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorites, riding with underdogs, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the one game everybody has been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, just bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Segment 3 here on this Monday, February 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So that Central Division stretch is over, and man, do the weight of these games get bigger, which Panthers, Sabres tonight. They'll get the Bruins on Wednesday, Tampa Bay on Thursday, and it's off to the Olympics, where more players for the Panthers will be playing those extra games, going back to my point in segment number 2. And it's important for the Panthers to finish strong. But, I can't come here and say if the Panthers win X amount of games of this, they can make it. At this point, it's one game at a time. In the words of Big C's, one period, one shift at a time. Which shout out to Big C's there. But that saying is so true. And that's what really the Panthers can only focus on. Can't change what's happened previously on this trip, on this short trip for the Panthers to St. Louis and then right back at home. But you can only focus on Buffalo. And they're hot. They're continuing to be hot. 24-1 since December 9th. And we were talking about weeks ago, I believe it was Jacob Winans and I were discussing about how it's Buffalo. They're going to find a way to teeter off and go back to who they are. But this is 25 games for this group. More than a quarter of the season. It's not a fluke. Where they're getting to goaltending. They're getting to scoring. And I go back to something I said in segment number 1, where it hasn't really mattered if the Panthers have been dominating the shot attempt share and they're giving up goals in the back of the net, because Buffalo, since December 9th, have been outshot by 3 shots per game. And how much they're outscoring their opposition by? 1.5 goals. So Buffalo is really converting quality chances over quantity. They're averaging just around 26 shots per game and giving up around 29 since December 9th. Thankfully, NHL.com allows me to see the range there, and it lets me use that filter. But this is the third of fourth of the 4 matchups, which the Panthers were shut out the first time, and the Panthers were able to take a 2-2 tie into the third period and take score twice in the third period, one of them being an empty netter right before the Sabres scored to at least make it a 1-goal game to at least make it closer than it actually was. But for Buffalo, it's continuing on this same run, which they have been dominant at home, and the Panthers gave them one of their only losses in this stretch at home. But these next two games against Buffalo, which tonight and then the last Friday of February, which Buffalo, both times that they'll be facing Florida, will be on the front end of a back-to-back. They'll be in Florida the first game and then Tampa Bay the second game, and it's happening twice in this month. But the Panthers, the second time they meet the Sabres later this month, it'll be on the second end of their back-to-back, which Florida will get Toronto just coming out of the Winter Olympic break. But the Panthers will get the Leafs on the second end of a back-to-back because they'll be in Tampa on that Wednesday. So interesting when it comes to the schedule there. And credit to the Panthers from their last matchup on January 12th, which in the middle of their 6-game road trip, they lose the first two games against Montreal and Toronto, and they find a way to go on a little bit of a on a mini streak and to end that road trip at least at 500 there. So that was a big win at the time to at least not have things go completely off for them. And that was a Colton Ellis start for the Sabres, which they'll see one of Colton Ellis or Alex Lyon as Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, is hurt again from his most recent start. So, and if I had to guess who's going to be between the pipes for the Sabres here, because it's a matchup for Buffalo that is directly against a team who's chasing, I'm going to say that it's going to be Alex Lyon who's going to be in the crease for Buffalo, which Alex Lyon, he set a franchise record for the Sabres in consecutive wins with 10. Not even Dominik Hasek did that in the 90s for the Buffalo Sabres. So it's a tough matchup as Alex Lyon really showed at least that he is an NHL goaltender from his play in Florida, getting that one-way contract in Detroit, and then continuing it on in Buffalo, which a little bit of a roster update from the Panthers here coming out of morning skate. Anton Lundell is in a non-contact yellow jersey. Jonah Gadrich, good news for Gadjo. He's in a full contact white, so one step closer to at least one of their bruisers on the fourth line being back after it looked like he was fine after that game against the Vegas Golden Knights, and then after that we haven't seen him for months from ever since that game in late October. And Brad Marchand is still not on the ice for the Panthers, so no sign of him. So it's going to be another game where the Panthers are going to be without Lundell. They're going to be without Brad Marchand. Cole Schwindt's going to continue playing on that third line for the Panthers. So we'll see how they continue to navigate that lineup as Luke Cunnin and Jesper Boquist are probably going to be playing again tonight for the Panthers. So we'll see how the Panthers manage this through, and we'll see if this is one of the teams that the Panthers are chasing. They have exactly the same games played, even though the team ahead of them in the Boston Bruins got a point in the Stadium Series after blowing a 4-goal lead, which if you watch that game live, oh my goodness, the amount of favorable whistles that the Tampa Bay Lightning had, especially where there was a 5-on-3 where the Bruins gloved the puck, closed in on the puck. And with that rule, when you're already on 5-on-3, you can't start the other penalty unless one of them expires. Crazy to think then of how rare that happens. An additional penalty on a 5-on-3, and then on a breakaway opportunity in overtime, it's blown dead when they were already coming up in transition and they were already at the red line. It looked like the goal was in, and then they blow it dead, and then the Tampa Bay Lightning find a way to win in a shootout in the Stadium Series. Wild Stadium Series game, and probably the most exciting as far as the gameplay that at least I've ever watched. So, but it helped the Panthers in some way, and the Panthers do have that head-to-head, but it won't matter unless the Panthers find a way to get 2 points and 2 regulation points, more importantly, because you need to make up some type of ground with these 4-point games here in this final stretch here, and to finish strong. You want to go into the Olympic break with some vibes and some good fortune for this Panthers team, and hopefully with a great bill of health, more importantly, coming out of it. So it starts tonight against the Buffalo Sabres, one game at a time. And hopefully that by the time we are talking to you guys on Tuesday, that we are talking about a win and for the Panthers to get one step closer to hopefully being back in the race. But that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Come back tomorrow as we will recap this game between the Florida Panthers and the Buffalo Sabres. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows in the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.